ever get that feeling? Like fear's this big wall stopping you from getting what you really want.
We've all been there.
Yeah, and you've been looking into Ron W Rathbun.
His notes are pretty amazing.
They really kind of flip the script on how fear works, how it affects us.
Right. Rathbun's work is so cool. He doesn't just talk about like the usual fear, that fight or flight thing when you're in danger.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got this idea that there are two main types of fear.
Okay.
There's the fear of dying, of course.
Right.
But then he said there's the fear of living, too.
Fear of living. I've definitely had those moments, like when you're in a really dangerous situation, your heart's pounding, adrenaline's pumping. But fear of living? What does that even mean?
It's really relatable. Have you ever felt like you're not good enough?
Oh, yeah.
Like you don't measure up?
Definitely.
Could be at work, in a relationship, or even just, in your own head.
Yeah.
Those times you feel inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's talking about. That's the fear of living.
Interesting.
It comes from how we react emotionally to life.
I see.
And it can trigger like all these negative emotions.
Wow. I've definitely been there. Just last week, I was getting ready for a big presentation, and I started thinking, what if I mess up? What if they hate it? And, I just felt myself spiraling, like into this pit of self-doubt. Is that what he means? Is that the fear of living that Rathbun's talking about?
That is a perfect example.
Really?
This happens to all of us.
Yeah.
Rathbun says when we get those feelings, of not being enough, they hit us hard. They attack our sense of self-worth.
Right.
It's like a punch to the ego.
Oof.
And that's where things get really fascinating.
Okay, so if we're always fighting these negative emotions because of the fear of living, right? How do we even function? What does Rathbun say we do with all that baggage?
He thinks we do what a lot of people do. We compartmentalize.
Oh, okay.
We shove all those feelings down, deep down inside.
Mm-hmm.
We hope they'll just disappear.
Yeah.
That's how we cope, but it's not always a good thing.
I can see that. It's like out of sight, out of mind, but you're not really dealing with the problem. Does Rathbun talk about what happens when you keep pushing those emotions down?
He calls it a struggle between our ego and our intellect. See, our ego wants to protect itself. It doesn't want to feel inadequate.
Yeah.
So it wants to avoid those painful feelings.
Makes sense.
But our intellect knows better. It knows we can't just ignore them forever.
Right, right.
So there's this constant tug of war.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where things can start to unravel.
It's like building a dam, trying to hold back this flood. Eventually, the pressure gets too high. Something's got to break.
Exactly. That's where Rathbun's ideas about the power of the mind come in.
Okay.
He thinks that if we tap into that power, we can detach from that cycle.
The cycle of fear and negativity and compartmentalizing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm listening. I love a good mind over matter approach. But how does it actually work? Does Rathbun give us any details?
He does. He has this analogy. He calls it looping.
Okay.
It shows how we get stuck in negativity. Imagine you keep replaying a mistake you made over and over.
Yeah.
Maybe you bombed that presentation you were prepping for.
Oh, no.
And now you can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
You analyze every little thing you did wrong.
I know that feeling. It's like picking out a scab. You should leave it alone, but you can't help yourself. You keep messing with it.
Exactly. And every time we replay it, we make those feelings of inadequacy worse.
Right.
It just fuels the fear of living.
Yeah.
We get stuck in this loop. We keep reliving our mistakes instead of learning from them and moving on.
Okay, so how do we get off this mental merry-go-round?
This is where it gets really interesting. Rathbun suggests this technique. It's called Kelee meditation.
Kelee meditation, this is the part that really caught my eye. In the notes you sent over, it sounds almost mystical. What is it exactly?
It's a way to shift our awareness, to move away from our usual thinking patterns.
Okay.
Rathbun calls our normal thinking the lesser Kelee.
Lesser Kelee?
It's the logical part of our brain, always analyzing, problem solving.
Yeah. Linear thinking.
Exactly.
So if the lesser Kelee is the logical brain, what's the other option?
He calls it the greater Kelee.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really cool. The greater Kelee isn't about thinking so much.
Okay.
It's more about feeling.
Interesting.
It's the realm of the heart.
Oh, wow.
Intuition, interconnectedness, it's all there.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying we shift our awareness from our heads to our hearts. How do you even do that?
That's the thing about Kelee meditation. Rathbun has a structured way to help us to make that mental shift.
Okay.
He says that if we spend time in the greater Kelee, we can detach from those emotional compartments.
From the negative ones we were talking about.
Right.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more. How does Kelee meditation work?
Well, he says it's this 5-minute meditation where you purposely move your awareness from your brain to your heart.
Okay.
It's like a mental exercise, training your mind to go somewhere else.
So we're training our minds to detach from those fears and insecurities, the things that keep us stuck in those loops.
Exactly. And Rathbun really believes that this detachment, it's the key to breaking free from fear. It's how we experience true emotional freedom.
Wow, this is fascinating. Let's just recap for a second, though. We started by talking about those two types of fear, right? Fear of dying and fear of living.
Right.
The fear of dying is like that survival instinct, and the fear of living is about feeling inadequate, not measuring up.
That's it.
And we talked about how those fears make us compartmentalize. We push down our negative emotions, and then that creates this struggle between our ego and intellect.
Exactly.
And to get out of that cycle, Rathbun says we have to tap into the power of our minds. We can use Kelee meditation, which encourages us to shift our awareness from our heads to our hearts. And that helps us detach from the fears that hold us back.
That's a great summary.
Okay, good.
But what's really amazing is how Rathbun connects this idea, the idea of detaching from fear, to something even bigger. He calls it higher states of awareness.
Higher states of awareness. Okay, now we're getting into something really interesting. Tell me more. What does he mean by that?
Well, it's a little philosophical, but he basically thinks that when we detach from our fears and insecurities, we open ourselves up to a deeper understanding.
Of ourselves.
Yes, and the world around us.
So it's not just about feeling less afraid. It's about seeing things from a new perspective.
Exactly.
It's like expanding our consciousness.
That's what he calls a higher state of being.
Wow, this is really making me think differently about fear and how it affects us. We've been talking about Ron W Rathbun's ideas on fear, and it's clear he's not talking about being afraid of spiders or heights. He says there's this deeper fear, the fear of living, that can really hold us back. But the thing that really got me thinking is his idea of higher states of awareness. It sounds kind of philosophical, like something you'd hear in a philosophy class.
Yeah, it is thought-provoking.
Not really something you'd expect in a discussion about conquering fear.
You're right, it does have that philosophical feel. But I think Rathbun's trying to say that getting over fear, it's not just about feeling less anxious or less stressed. It's about, tapping into a different way of being.
Okay.
That's more expansive, more connected.
So these higher states of awareness, it's more about shifting our perspective, seeing things differently.
That's how I see it. Think about those times when you've felt totally at peace.
Yeah.
Maybe you're out in nature or listening to music.
Yeah.
You're not so caught up in your thoughts, you're just present.
Right. Yeah. I get that.
That's a glimpse of what Rathbun's talking about.
I can definitely relate to that. Feeling present, it's like all the mental noise disappears, and there's just this sense of calm, clarity. Is that what he means by detaching from our ego and intellect?
Exactly. It's about moving beyond thinking, experiencing the world from the heart.
Right.
Remember we were talking about Kelee meditation, shifting from the lesser Kelee to the greater Kelee.
Shifting from the logical mind to the heart. So is that what he's saying, that Kelee meditation can help us reach those higher states?
He thinks it's a powerful way to do it. He says that when we can quiet our minds and connect with our hearts, we start to experience detachment. And they can ease pain, physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain.
That makes sense. If we're less caught up in our worries, we're naturally going to suffer less. But how does that tie into healing? You said before that Rathbun connects freeing ourselves from fear with healing.
It is an interesting connection. Think about it like this. When we're always afraid, it creates tension in our bodies and minds.
Right.
And that tension can show up in different ways. It could be physical problems, emotional distress.
Yeah, yeah.
Rathbun seems to be saying that by letting go of those fears, we create space for healing.
So it's not that fear itself causes illness. It's more like it blocks healing.
That's a good way to put it. Imagine a garden full of weeds.
Okay.
The weeds choke the plants. They can't grow. Fear can be like those weeds,
I see.
taking up space, energy that could be used for healing and growth.
I like that analogy. So when we detach from our fears through Kelee meditation, we're pulling out those weeds. We're making room for healing to happen.
Exactly. And that healing can happen on so many levels.
Yeah.
Physically, emotionally, even spiritually.
Wow.
It's about healing the whole person.
This is all starting to sound really empowering. It's like we're not just victims of our fears. We can be part of our own healing.
Exactly.
We have the power to choose how we react. We can create a state of being that's good for us.
I think that's a message that could really help people. Anyone who's struggling with fear, or any kind of emotional pain.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we have more control than we think.
As we're talking about this, I keep thinking about being stuck in that loop, replaying past mistakes over and over. It's like I'm giving those negative experiences too much power.
That happens a lot. We dwell on those moments when we feel like we've failed.
They
But what if, instead of reliving them with fear and self-criticism, we approach them with curiosity
Curiosity.
and compassion?
Curiosity and compassion. What do you mean?
Imagine you look back on a mistake,
Okay.
and instead of saying, oh, I messed that up, what's wrong with me? You ask, what can I learn from this? How can I grow?
Interesting.
It's about shifting from judgment to learning.
That changes everything. Instead of seeing those experiences as failures, we see them as chances to grow. That's part of what Rathbun means by higher awareness. Being able to see past the pain and fear and see the potential for learning and growth.
I think you're right. It's about being able to see both sides, the light and the shadow, the good and the bad, and how they're all connected.
This conversation is really making me rethink my whole relationship with fear. But before we go too far, I think we need to talk about something we kind of skipped over earlier. Rathbun talks about a disharmonious vibratory rate. Think of it as feeling out of sync with ourselves, like when your thoughts, feelings, or actions don't match up.
That's a great way to put it. It's much easier to understand that way.
And if Kelee meditation is about shifting our awareness from our heads to our hearts, maybe that's how we harmonize those different parts of ourselves, create inner peace.
That's a good point. It's about finding balance, where we're not fighting with ourselves all the time.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see how all these ideas connect. But before we go too far with our own interpretations, I think it's time to hear from Rathbun himself about how to actually put this stuff into practice. We know he mentions an app for Kelee meditation, but what else does he suggest?
That's a great question, and a perfect way to move into the next part of our discussion. Rathbun does give some specific advice on how to use these principles in everyday life, and it's surprisingly practical.
Okay, now I'm really interested. I'm ready to get into the details. How do we actually use these ideas?
Ready to explore Rathbun's roadmap to freedom from fear?
We've been having such an interesting talk about Ron W Rathbun's ideas about fear.
It's fascinating stuff.
We talked about those two types of fear, remember? Fear of dying and fear of living.
Right.
And how they can cause this inner battle between our ego and our intellect.
Exactly. A real tug of war.
But it's his idea of a higher state of awareness that's got me hooked. He suggests that, facing our fears, it can actually lead us to a deeper sense of peace and well-being.
That's a really important part of his work.
Yeah.
He doesn't see fear as something to just avoid.
Okay.
He sees it as a chance to grow, to transform.
I like that.
He even says that true emotional harmony, it evolves. It turns into these higher states of awareness.
Wow.
Which then leads to healing.
Okay, I'm all for turning challenges into opportunities. How do we actually do that with fear? It's one thing to talk about facing it. It's another to, actually do it. What does Rathbun say? How do we do it?
Well, he stresses that our minds and bodies, they're connected.
Right.
He says if we can consciously relax our minds, we can start to experience these qualities of detachment.
Detachment.
And this detachment, he says, can help ease pain.
Okay.
Physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain.
So it's not just about changing our thoughts. It's about changing how we relate to them. Like, instead of getting lost in all that mental chatter, we learn to just observe without judgment.
That's exactly it. Rathbun believes that being able to detach from our thoughts and emotions, it's crucial for finding real inner peace.
Inner peace.
And he even suggests that this inner peace, this relaxed state of mind, it can actually make us physically healthier.
That's a powerful idea, that changing how we think can actually affect our physical health. But how does that connect back to fear?
Remember we talked about the fear of living, how it comes from those feelings of not being good enough.
Right.
Rathbun says that when we can detach from those negative thoughts, we start to see ourselves differently.
Okay.
We see the world differently. We're less critical.
Less judgmental.
Of ourselves and others.
So it's not about pretending those fears aren't there. It's about changing how we relate to them.
Exactly.
Instead of letting them control us, we choose to observe them without getting swept away.
You got it. It's about building that inner strength, being able to face our fears without being overwhelmed. And Rathbun believes that's a big part of reaching those higher states of awareness.
It reminds me of that Nelson Mandela quote, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it."
That's a great connection.
It's not about having no fear. It's about learning to act despite it.
Rathbun would agree with that.
Yeah.
Fear is natural. It has a purpose.
It's part of being human.
It's about managing it, not letting it rule our lives.
Not letting it limit our potential. Okay, so facing our fears can help us grow, heal, and even reach those higher states of awareness. But what about the practical stuff? We talk about Kelee meditation, but are there other things we can do every day to cultivate this mindset?
Rathbun's a big believer in self-awareness.
Okay,
He says it's the foundation for any kind of personal growth.
makes sense.
He wants us to pay attention to our thoughts, feelings, and actions,
Mm-hmm.
and to see how they affect our well-being.
So being mindful of our inner world, noticing those patterns of fear and negativity that might be holding us back. Like if
Yes,
I'm always worrying about something, I can stop and ask myself, is this worry helping me? Can I do something about it? Or am I just letting it control my life?
that's exactly the kind of self-reflection he's talking about. He
Okay.
says that by becoming aware of our thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
we can start to challenge the beliefs that aren't serving us.
The ones that are holding us back.
Right. You just observe your thoughts
Mhm.
as they come up without judgment.
Without getting attached to them.
Exactly. You notice them, acknowledge them, and let them go, like watching clouds drift by.
I like that. That sounds helpful for breaking free from those negative loops.
It is.
If you can catch those negative thoughts early on, you can stop them from taking over.
Exactly. We create space between our thoughts and our reactions.
We don't react so automatically.
We're less controlled by our emotions. We can respond to things with more clarity.
It's like we're taking the wheel instead of being tossed around by the waves.
Exactly.
We're in control of our mental and emotional state. This is all making so much sense. I'm really excited to try some of this stuff out in my own life.
That's what's so great about Rathbun's work. He gives us these deep insights into fear, and then he gives us tools to actually use them.
It's not just theory, it's a roadmap. And speaking of roadmaps, I know Rathbun mentioned an app for Kelee meditation. Seems like a good place to start for anyone who's interested.
It is.
It has guided meditation instructions, so anyone can try it.
It's a great resource for cultivating detachment and inner peace.
Well, I think we've covered a lot today, and I'm feeling inspired to really explore my own relationship with fear, to trade in those feelings of limitation for something more empowering.
That's a great takeaway from Rathbun's work. He reminds us that fear doesn't have to hold us back. It could be a springboard for growth, for healing, even for understanding ourselves and the world better.
So to everyone listening, we encourage you to take your own deep dive into fear, explore the ideas we talked about, try some of the techniques like Kelee meditation, and see what you discover. Remember, as Rathbun says, the power to free yourself from fear is within you. Stay curious and keep diving deep.